My brother said, "You live alone and play video games. Be realistic." I said, "Okay." Then I handed Mom a $113,000 invoice. My brother leaned back in his chair at the dinner table I had built by hand from reclaimed oak, looked at me across 2 years of my life and $41,000 of my money, and told me to be realistic. My mother nodded. I said nothing. I walked to my truck, sat in the driveway for 20 minutes staring at the house I had rebuilt from the studs up, and then I drove home and opened a spreadsheet. 3 months later I walked back into that dining room with a manila envelope and my contractor's license number printed at the top of a document that stopped the sale of the house dead. Original post. My name is Nolan. I am 32 years old, I hold a general contractor's license, and I spent 2 years of my life rebuilding my parents' house while my brother Connor watched from across town and admired his own kitchen renovation. When I say rebuilt, I do not mean painted and updated the fixtures. I mean new roof, new framing where the old framing had rotted, completely replaced electrical because the original wiring was a fire hazard dressed up in curtains, new plumbing throughout, updated insulation, new hardwood floors, a reframed second story, and 2 bathrooms stripped to the subfloor and started over. I did all of the labor myself. I floated all the material costs. The final number, tracked across 412 receipts and 1,100 logged hours, was $41,614.37. My parents did not ask me to do this. I volunteered, because the alternative was watching them try to sell a house that was falling apart around them for whatever distressed price the market would offer, and use whatever they got to fund a much smaller and worse life somewhere else. Dad had retired from the plant. Mom worked part-time at a dentist's office. Their savings were modest enough that the word modest was doing a lot of heavy lifting. The house had foundation cracks deep enough to fit your thumb into, a roof leaking in 4 places, and plumbing that dated back to 1971. Something had to happen. Connor's contribution to this crisis was to come over one Sunday, look around the living room, and say that sucked and he wished he could help, but Paige and he had just redone their kitchen. The kitchen cost $65,000. It has quartz countertops and a pot filler above the stove. Paige, who I have personally watched microwave a hot dog and consider dinner prepared, has a restaurant-grade pot filler above her stove. Connor pulls in roughly $120,000 a year in regional sales. They were not struggling. The definition of family obligation in their house just happened to begin and end at things that benefited Connor. I sat down with my parents on a Sunday after dinner and told them I could do the full renovation. Real work, not cosmetic. I would do the labor myself, charge only for materials, and we would figure out the financial arrangement down the road. My dad teared up, which for Rick is the emotional equivalent of a full breakdown, because Rick does not emote. He processes everything internally and reports back with silence. Mom hugged me and said I was her angel. I am not ashamed to admit that landed harder than it should have, because when you have spent your life being the afterthought in a family that has a golden child, hearing your mother call you her angel does something to you. So I went to work. Nights after my regular jobs, full weekends, holidays. I took 2 weeks off around Thanksgiving in the first year just to get the roof closed before the weather turned. I lost 15 pounds that year, not through any plan, just through sustained physical exhaustion. My girlfriend at the time, Cassie, told me she felt like she was dating a ghost who showed up occasionally smelling like sawdust and asking if she had seen his level. She was not wrong. I missed a close friend's wedding rehearsal dinner. I spent my 30th birthday on the roof in the rain replacing flashing because the forecast showed 3 more days of storms and the drywall I had just hung could not get wet. Connor came by once during the entire 2-year project. He looked around, said it was looking good, drank one of my beers, and left. When I asked him later if he could come over on a Saturday just to help me carry drywall upstairs, not hang it, not tape it, just carry it, he said he had promised the kids a trip to the zoo. Meanwhile, Paige was posting about the importance of family on social media from their newly renovated kitchen, standing beside the pot filler. I kept a spreadsheet, every receipt, every hardware store run, every hour logged. I kept it because I am a contractor and that is what contractors do, and also because somewhere in the back of my mind I understood that I needed proof of what this had cost me, even if I could not fully articulate at the time what I thought I was going to do with it. The house came out genuinely beautiful. New hardwood floors throughout, a completely rebuilt second story, a kitchen that made Connor's pot filler palace look like a break room, updated bathrooms, a craftsman-style front door I drove 3 hours round trip to pick up because Mom had seen one she liked in a magazine. The neighbors came over to look. A real estate agent who drove past told Dad the property value had probably tripled. Dad shook my hand and held it about 10 seconds longer than he normally would, which in his language was a declaration. Mom cried. And for a short time, everything felt like it had been worth it. Then the house became an asset. A real, tangible, sellable asset. And I started noticing that my name was not on the deed. Update 1. About 3 months after the last coat of paint dried, I brought it up. It was a Sunday afternoon. Mom had made chicken casserole, and Connor and Paige had come over with their kids because suddenly the beautiful house with heated floors was everyone's favorite gathering place. I waited until after dinner, until the kids were in the living room watching cartoons, and then I said at the table that I wanted to talk about something. I said I had been thinking about the deed, that given everything I had put into the house, it might make sense to add my name as a co-owner. Nothing extreme, just some acknowledgement of what I had contributed. The silence that followed had weight to it. My dad looked at my mom. She looked at her hands. She said they had been thinking about the future, about what happened to the house when they were gone, and they had decided to leave it to Connor and Paige. I said his name back to her. Just the name, no question attached. She said he had 3 kids, that I was single with my own house, that Connor's family was growing, that the house had 4 bedrooms now, and here she paused, and said thanks to me, as though she expected me to find that flattering. Connor leaned back in his chair and told me he got that I had put in work, and that everybody appreciated it, but that I lived alone and played video games, and I needed to be realistic. 2 years, $41,000, 1,100 hours. His response was be realistic. I looked at my mother. She nodded. Not a hesitant nod, a confirming one, as though Connor had raised a point that clarified something that had been ambiguous before he raised it. My father stared at the table I had built. He said nothing. Rick's move in moments of conflict was to go completely still and let the room decide without him. I said something about wanting to understand whether the plan was to give the house to the person who had showed up once and taken a beer. Connor said it had been 1 beer. That was where he chose to push back. Paige said I was being unfair, that Connor worked hard to provide for his family, and that not everyone had the luxury of being single with no responsibilities. I had spent 2 years on my hands and knees installing tile in their in-law's bathroom. Paige called that a luxury. I stood up. I was calm. I had learned early that getting loud in my family just gave them a reason to call me dramatic and dismiss whatever I was feeling. I said I needed to think about it. I walked out without raising my voice, got into my truck, and sat in the driveway for nearly 20 minutes. Cassie and I had broken up 4 months before that dinner, partly because the renovation had consumed 2 years of my life, and partly because she had told me I had a pattern of giving everything to people who gave nothing back. That observation had annoyed me at the time. Sitting in that truck, it did not annoy me anymore. I drove home and opened the spreadsheet. Update 2. I called my friend Travis the next morning. Travis is a small-town attorney who handles real estate and contracts, not flashy, just solid and precise in a way that matters when things get serious. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment and then asked if I had kept receipts for all of it. I said yes. He said I was sitting on one of the cleanest unjust enrichment claims he had heard in a while. He explained the concept: when someone benefits from another person's work and money to a degree that is unfair without compensation, a court will typically find that restitution is owed. The house had tripled in value. I had documented every dollar of materials and every hour of labor. Travis said that even under a conservative reading, my parents owed me restitution, and that if fair market labor rates for a licensed contractor were factored in, the total would be considerably higher than $41,000. He also mentioned a mechanic's lien, a contractor's legal right to place a claim on a property they have improved without being paid, which prevents sale, refinancing, or transfer of the deed until the claim is settled. We were still within the filing window. I did not file right away. These were still my parents. The thought of legal action against my mother and father sat in my stomach badly. But every time I started to back away from it, I heard Connor's chair creak and my mother's nod, and I stopped backing away. In the months that followed, I pulled back from the family almost entirely. Mom texted occasionally, small, pleasant messages that made no reference to anything that had happened, as though the dinner had not occurred and the silence since was a scheduling issue rather than a response to being told my 2 years of labor did not outweigh Connor's reproductive choices. Connor sent nothing. Zero contact, which told me more about the architecture of our relationship than anything he had said at the table. I threw myself into work. My contracting business had taken a real hit during the renovation because I had been redirecting so much of my time. I spent those months rebuilding the client base, taking every job I could find, and the money began to accumulate in a way it had not for a while. I hired a young guy named Jake fresh out of trade school, eager and hardworking, and I started teaching him the same way my own mentor had taught me. Something about that was steadying. Then I met Claire. She walked into the hardware store trying to figure out which anchors she needed to mount a television. I helped her. She asked if I wanted coffee, and I said yes, because apparently I can rebuild a house from the foundation up but can be completely undone by a direct question from someone who smells like cinnamon. She was a physical therapist who had just moved to town, and she was direct and funny and did not perform either quality. When I eventually told her the full story about the house and the dinner, she did not look at me with pity. She set down her fork and said that what had been described to her was not a family decision, it was theft with a Hallmark card attached. She asked me a question later, at home, while I was going over the spreadsheet again. She asked what I would tell a client who had done $40,000 of work on a property they did not own, with no written contract. The answer was obvious and identical to what Travis had already told me. The only reason I had been holding myself to different standards was because it was family. Claire's point, delivered without theater, was that family was supposed to be the reason you were not taken advantage of, not the mechanism by which it happened. Update 3. Travis called on a Thursday evening in August. My parents had listed the house with a real estate agent, listed it at $435,000. The house they had been prepared to sell for distressed prices before I spent 2 years on it. The house I had no legal claim to. Travis asked if I wanted to try speaking to them one more time before anything was filed. I thought about it for a few seconds. I said no, but I wanted to do something before the lien hit. I wanted to go to Sunday dinner and hand them the invoice in person, at the table I had built, and let them read it with their own eyes. Travis said that was either very smart or very dramatic. I told him it could be both. I spent a week preparing the invoice. Every item documented, every receipt attached, every hour logged. The materials section came to $41,614.37 across 412 line items. Then the labor section, 1,100 hours at my licensed market rate of $65 per hour, which is what I charge clients, came to $71,500. Grand total, $113,114.37. I printed it on company letterhead, included Travis's contact information at the bottom, and put it in a manila envelope. Claire sat and listened to the plan and then asked whether I was doing it for the money or to make them understand what they had done. I said both, but more the second. She said go. She said whatever happened at that table, I was to walk out knowing my worth and not let them talk me down. Then she went back to her book. I called Mom on Wednesday and said I wanted to come by for Sunday dinner. She sounded thrilled. She asked if she should set a place for Claire too. The lightness of it, the way the preceding months of silence had apparently been filed under scheduling conflict rather than consequence, almost knocked me off course. I said it would just be me, and asked if Connor and Paige would be there. She said of course they came every week. I called Travis on Thursday and told him to have the lien paperwork ready to file Monday morning. Sunday arrived. I drove over with the windows down and the envelope on the passenger seat. I parked in the driveway I had repaved with my own hands and sat for a moment looking at the house. New roof, new siding, new windows, the Craftsman front door I had driven 3 hours to collect because Mom had circled it in a magazine. Every surface carried some version of my labor. Inside, the house smelled like casserole. Mom hugged me at the door. Dad gripped my hand. Connor was on the couch with his oldest watching something on the television I had mounted on the wall I had framed. Paige was in the kitchen standing at the island I had built, scrolling her phone, and said long time no see without looking up. Dinner was what family dinners become when everyone knows something is wrong and nobody has agreed to say so. Mom talked about her co-workers. Dad delivered a 4-minute weather report. Connor gave a detailed breakdown of his son's soccer season. I ate, nodded, and waited. When the kids moved to the living room and the 5 of us were back at the table, I reached down and placed the envelope on the reclaimed oak surface. Mom asked what it was. I said I had heard they listed the house. My voice was even. Conversational, even. She started to explain that they had been planning to mention it. I said I understood, and then I said I had spent the last few months thinking about the conversation we had had, the one about the deed, about who would receive the house, about being realistic. I looked at Connor on that last word. He shifted. I said I should have treated the renovation as what it was from the beginning, a professional job performed by a licensed contractor. I had done the work. I had covered the materials. I had not charged anything because they were my family, but since the house was being sold and it had been established that I would hold no ownership stake in a property I had rebuilt from the studs up, I felt it was time to settle the account. I slid the envelope across the table. Mom opened it slowly. She unfolded the invoice and her eyes moved down the page, past the company letterhead, past the itemized material list, past the labor log with the per hour rate, all the way to the total printed in bold at the bottom. The color left her face. Connor leaned over to look. He went the same shade. Paige craned her neck from across the table and asked what it was. I said it was an invoice for services rendered. The next 30 seconds were loud in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Connor said I could not be serious. I said I was, entirely, and that every line item was documented, with receipts for every material charge and a log for every hour, along with photographs of the renovation at each stage. Mom set the invoice down and pressed her palms flat against the table. She said I could not charge my own family for helping them. I said I had not charged anything when I was helping. I was charging now, because the family had made clear that my contribution did not count. Connor had 3 kids, I played video games, their logic. This was me being realistic. I was a licensed contractor who had performed over $100,000 of work on a property I had no stake in, and that property was being listed at $435,000. Connor said it was extortion. I told him extortion involved threatening someone to obtain something undeserved, and that an invoice for documented work was a different thing entirely. I suggested he ask his pot filler if he needed clarification. Paige said I was tearing the family apart over money, and the specific irony of the woman who had not brought so much as a sandwich to the job site during 2 years of construction calling me selfish about money while seated at a kitchen island I had built was so thick it had physical presence. I did not take the bait. I said the decision to exclude me from the deed and sell the property was what had fractured things, and that I was responding to it. I told her that the kitchen she was sitting in had been built while I was on a ladder in the rain replacing the roof, and that she might consider sitting this one out. She stopped talking. Dad spoke one word. Son. He said it the way people say a word when they have many words behind it and cannot find the door for any of them. I told him there were 3 options. My name on the deed with a fair ownership split reflecting the value I had added, full payment of the invoice. Or Travis would file the lien Monday morning, and the sale could not proceed until the matter was settled. I told them the attorney's name and number were on the invoice. The word attorney hit the room like something thrown. Mom started crying. Genuine tears, not the performative kind she used when she wanted someone to feel guilty enough to apologize. I sat with the discomfort of watching my mother cry because of something I had done, and then I sat with the memory of her nodding at Connor's chair lean, and the discomfort became smaller. Connor stood and told Dad to say something. Dad did not say anything. He was looking at the invoice numbers, and I think he was running a different set of numbers in his head, the ones that represented every Saturday I had shown up and every Saturday Connor had not. I stood, said I had said what I needed to say, and that anything further should go through Travis. Then I walked out. Update 4. Claire was reading when I got home. She looked up and asked how it went. I told her Paige might put a hit out on me. She said she would handle Paige. The lien was filed Monday morning. By Wednesday, my parents' real estate agent had called to say there was a title problem and the sale could not move forward. Mom called twice. I texted back that communication should go through Travis. It was the hardest text I had sent in recent memory. Connor and Paige hired an attorney. Their lawyer called Travis. Travis presented the full documentation, 412 receipts, the labor log, the photographs. The other attorney called back 2 days later to say his clients wanted to settle. When you put 1,100 hours of documented skilled labor in front of a lawyer alongside 41,000 in dated, itemized receipts, the legal arithmetic becomes straightforward very quickly. The settlement, I was added to the deed as a co-owner with a 30% equity stake reflecting the value I had contributed to the property. When the house sold, I received my share of the proceeds before any remaining distribution. The sale closed 6 weeks later at $420,000. My 30% came to $126,000. After Travis's fees, I walked away with just over $115,000. Connor and Paige received less than they had been counting on. My parents used their portion to purchase a smaller place, a clean ranch-style house that needed no work. Connor did not contact me for approximately 4 months. Mom took almost as long. Dad reached out first. He called on a Sunday evening and said he should have spoken up at that dinner, that he had known it was wrong and said nothing, and that he was sorry. I believed him. Rick does not say things he does not mean. He mostly just does not say things. Mom came back eventually. She said she had been so focused on Connor's family that she had lost sight of the son standing directly in front of her, the one who had given 2 years of his life without being asked twice. She said she was ashamed. I told her I appreciated that and that I meant it. I also told her that going forward, things would be different. I was done being the family's free utility service. She said she understood. Connor texted around the holidays. It was longer than anything I had expected from him, thoughtful in a way that surprised me, because I had not credited him with that capacity lately. He said he had been thinking about how he had treated me, not just with the house but going back further, and that his kids kept asking about Uncle Nolan and he did not know what to tell them. I read it twice, and then I called him. We talked for an hour. It was not a resolution with music underneath it. It was honest, which was more than we had managed before, and I decided that was enough to start with. Update 5. That is more or less where things stand. My contracting business now runs with a crew of 4, including Jake, who turned out to be an excellent framer. Claire and I moved in together in the spring, and she has already begun expressing opinions about the bathroom tile, which means my life has become an uninterrupted loop of renovations in which I at least now hold the deed. I have been thinking about what I learned from all of this, and I keep arriving at the same few things. Being generous is not the same as being without limits. Family is not a justification for extraction. A spreadsheet maintained with discipline across 2 years of labor is among the most effective documents a person can produce. And the son who shows up quietly and does the work and never demands recognition is not operating from a position of weakness. He is simply waiting for the moment when patience becomes documentation, and documentation becomes the conversation that nobody could avoid having. Edit. For everyone asking whether I regret handing my mother an invoice at her own dinner table, I regret that it was necessary. I do not regret that I did it. There is a meaningful gap between those two things. Edit 2. For the people suggesting I should have had a written contract from the beginning, correct. If you are reading this while planning to do significant renovation work on a family member's property at your own expense, stop reading, call a lawyer, and get an agreement in writing before you pick up a single tool. The informal arrangement made sense to me at the time because they were my parents. That logic cost me 2 years and a considerable amount of money before the legal system restored the math. Edit 3. For the people who said Connor was right that I should be realistic, he was right about one thing. I had not been realistic. I had been operating on the assumption that love was a form of collateral, that what I gave would be recognized and accounted for without needing to be formalized. That is not realism. That is optimism dressed up as patience. The realistic version of this story is the one where I hand the invoice across the table I built, and the house sale stops until the math is settled. Which is exactly what happened. So in the end, I was very realistic, just on a delayed schedule. Edit 4. For the person who asked about Cassie. She was right that I had a pattern of giving everything to people who took it. I am aware of that. I am also aware that the pattern ended at a dining table in eastern Tennessee on a Sunday evening, across from a brother who had contributed a single Coors Light and a chair lean to a project that cost me 2 years of my life. Patterns are easier to break once you can see them clearly enough. That dinner was the clearest I had seen in a long time.